Okay, now if you take a cross-section of the brain, and this is a coronal section of the brain right here, right? You can sort of see the surface layer of gray matter. And let me bring this up here so you can get a better view of it. So, like here, this is actually a slice, a coronal slice out of the human brain. Let me see if I get the best lighting here. This is a pain. Okay, let's see if this works. No, that makes it worse. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you can sort of see the surface areas of gray matter right there. And that right there where it's at the surface is a gyrus, right? And you can see where it descends below and then comes back up, descends below and then comes back up. Those are the sulci, right? The valleys, basically. And then you can see rather dramatically here all of the white matter, localized below, right? And here is that band of white matter that connects the two hemispheres. That's called the Corpus Callosum, right? And then you could also see, hopefully, some deeper areas of gray matter. There's this little section here. There's an analytes over here. You can see some spaces in the brain. These are the ventricles through which cerebrospinal fluid passes, right? And here even you can see the temporal lobe, right? And here is, let's say, the frontal lobe. And here is the lateral fissure with a whole bunch of sulci and gyri inside. And then deep inside here is actually the insular lobe. That's what's hidden away deep inside that lateral fissure is the cortex that's associated with the insular lobe, right? So, the gray matter, again, is neuron cell bodies, right? So I'm going to drop things, but here's a neuron cell body and all the associated dendrites, right? And the incoming synaptic connections. So the actual synapses that are made within these areas of gray matter. So there's lots of, soma and dendrites and axon terminals and synaptic connections that, basically are the gray matter. And the outer bark of the brain, that cortex, is 100%. That's definitely significant amounts of gray matter. But then below that, right, like the corpus callosum and all the other white matter, pathways that you find subcortically, right? That's all these myelinated axons. So this is the white matter basically in the brain. And what's really fascinating is how much of these white matter connections are critical to brain function, because yes, it's important to share information synaptically for neurons to talk to each other, but also to wire up distributed regions of gray matter as networks that underlie our ability to make decisions or to speak or to comprehend language or to perceive what it is we're looking at, for example. The corpus callosum, again, is that band of white matter that connects the two hemispheres of the brain and extends rostrally all the way caudally across the brain. That's one of the things when you look at like a coronal section, you're only getting a tiny little sliver of a structure that extends 3D in space. So this little piece that I showed you here a moment ago, let me get that back up here. So this little piece right, let me see if I can do this, like right over there. Let me do it on this side, actually might be a little bit better. So, yeah, like there and there, right on either side of the lateral ventricles there. That's a part of the basal ganglia. Remember, those are subcortical nuclei that are critical for, timing of movements, initiation of movements, stopping and breaking of movements. So that's a tiny little sliver on either side there that's called the caudate nucleus. And caudate, you should know now, right, means tail. That just looks like a spot. That doesn't really look like a tail. But actually, if you go kind of rostral to caudal, this thing is kind of wraps, it sort of is like C-shaped. It kind of goes like around like this. It's a much more extensive structure than what is revealed actually in a single coronal slice. And there are two coronal slices that are indicated here, right? One is a little bit more anterior, and one is a little bit more posterior. So that's the power of those coronal slices. And then, the ventricles, which I showed you examples of in that coronal slice, are literally a series of chambers through which cerebrospinal fluid flows. And the ventricles, these larger spaces, are actually linked by narrower channels that are called aqueducts. And cerebrospinal fluid is extremely important for providing support for brain and spinal cord, for the central nervous system. But also we're learning it has communication channels, like chemical communication channels. Like, something can be released in one area, of the brain into the CSF, and it can travel and impact via receptors, tissues in other areas of the central nervous system. The other thing we've learned that's absolutely essential about cerebrospinal fluid is how sleep is not a luxury. Sleep is something you absolutely need to get, because when you sleep, when you go into that deep restorative sort of sleep, all the capillaries that run through the brain, right, which are wrapped by some of the membranous projections of astrocytes, as they, feed, tissues all the way delving deep into the brain. During the day, that's kind of tighter, and the cerebrospinal fluid is more around the brain and spinal cord, and it's helping to, cushion and, support the brain and spinal cord. It's helpful for preventing injury when you get hit and things like that, because your brain is floating in fluid. But when you get into that deep sort of slow wave sleep, the astrocytes sort of pull back a little bit from the capillaries, which allows for the cerebrospinal fluid to enter into the brain tissues, to sort of flow deeper through the brain and clear out a lot of the molecular debris, the stuff that might have collected over the day from normal metabolism of the brain. And when you wake up in the morning and you feel like, oh my god, after a really good sleep, you feel like they've cleared out all the junk in your head. That's literally what happens when you get good sleep, because of that influx of cerebrospinal fluid basically through the tissues of the brain.